What does it feel like to realize, not slowly, not painfully, but in one single crystal clear moment, that your marriage was never what you thought it was? Jessica found out on a Tuesday afternoon. Her husband's arm was linked through his mother's. He was gesturing at her home, the home her parents gave her, casually handing out rooms like a hotel manager at check-in, his parents upstairs, his sister and nephew downstairs. And Jessica? She could keep the master bedroom. He was generous like that. She had 3 months of memories flash through her mind in seconds. The bank card, the overheard phone call, the look he always gave her, that confident, practiced look that said he could talk anyone into anything. And then she smiled. What she said in that moment was so precise, so calm, so unarguably fair, that it turned his entire scheme inside out without a single raised voice. And it set into motion a chain of events that would close one chapter of her life and, slowly, open another. This is a story about what it means to truly know your worth, not when things are easy, but when everything is on the line. If this story stays with you, let it reach someone else too. Like, comment, share, and hit subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. This content was manually researched, developed, and edited by our team with the intention of delivering meaningful stories and real-life lessons to our audience.
Jessica Miller wasn't my typical client. Her file was perfect. Bank statements, timelines, a methodical takedown of a marriage gone wrong. He gave them our bedroom, she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. He wasn't just a husband, he was a pawn. And I was her new queen. She recounted his mother's passive aggression over drinks. It wasn't about etiquette. It was a tactical play for dominance in her own home. Then came the appraisal of her expensive china. They weren't admiring it, they were cataloging assets. I saw the case taking shape. The master bedroom, the heart of the marital home. They were turning her into a tenant in her own life. This wasn't a family visit, it was an erasure. Her office was reassigned to a nephew. Her sanctuary became a line item on their list of demands, a domestic hostile takeover. For a moment, she just stared at my wall. I could see the husband's lie, just for a little while, echoing in the silence. It was fraud. I could practically hear him. "It's a big house, Jess." That's classic gaslighting, making the victim feel unreasonable for having boundaries. But her voice steadied when she told me how she pushed back. His mother attacked her tone. A spark of admiration cut through my professional detachment. "His family is your family," I scribbled on my legal pad. This wasn't an invitation, it was a declaration of conquest. Then she dropped the bomb, overhearing talk of a long con involving her credit. My pen stopped. We had them. This was financial abuse. Brian's platitudes about family were just a cover. He didn't want a partner with a big heart. He wanted fuel for his family's fire. "You need to fix your attitude." That line, directed at my client, was pure gold for our affidavit. They saw her strength as a problem to be solved. Her voice was clear, recalling her words. "This is my house." It wasn't a plea. It was a statement of legal fact. She was drawing the battle line. His response, "What's yours is mine." I almost laughed. He'd just confessed to his entire misguided worldview. He never saw her as a person. That laugh she described, it wasn't hysteria. It was the sound of a woman who had finally seen the grift and was ready to burn it all down. In that conference room, she became more than a client. She was a fighter who'd stunned her opponents. Their shock was their confession. "So we should add my parents to your condo deed?" I did laugh then, a perfect, beautiful checkmate. She weaponized their own twisted logic. Bringing up the school district was a master stroke. She wasn't just defending a house, she was exposing their entire predatory motive. She described the scene on the lawn, her husband screaming, "Calculating?" at her. I recognized the rage of a man whose scheme had just imploded. His mother's trembling voice, "We thought you were a respectable girl." To them, respect was just another word for obedience. She told me how her father arrived. Brian couldn't meet his eyes. Guilt is a powerful thing, but it doesn't win cases. Facts do. He was still ranting about a free housing scheme. All I heard was the sound of a weak case getting weaker. Jessica stood her ground. "The tour's over," she'd said. In that moment, I knew we would win. I nodded slowly as she told me. The click of the deadbolt was the period at the end of the sentence. I put my hand on her arm in the deposition room. The silence was safe now. We heard about the screaming later. I knew she was no good. The last desperate gasp of a man who knows he's been outplayed. I saw her shoulders tense, and a cold, professional anger settled in. They weren't sorry for the pain they caused. They were just mad they got caught. I reviewed the wedding photos later, the look on the in-laws' faces. It wasn't pride. It was the look of investors appraising a new acquisition. Their plan to use her home as a family compound had failed. Brian hadn't just lost a property dispute, he'd actively dismantled his own marriage. For them, it was always about the house. Not a home, but an asset. Not a wife, but an entry on a ledger. Now I understood my client's initial description. The mother-in-law's eyes. It was the calculated gaze of a predator, sizing up its mark. We built a case on facts and the law. Theirs was built on manipulation. They underestimated her completely, and that was their fatal error. She had the deed, the law, and my firm behind her. Brian was left with nothing but his mother's disastrous, greedy little plan. They thought they'd married a compliant asset, an easy win. They never realized they were starting a fight they could not possibly win. They'll spin a story of good intentions, but her home was never theirs to give away, and my job was to make that fact legally indisputable. When their lawyer approached us with a ridiculous offer, I sent back a one-word email: no. He stopped cold. He knew. It was over. I didn't know the full extent of the pressure she'd been under, but seeing her hold up under cross-examination, I saw a resilience that went beyond the case file. From the moment Jessica Miller walked into my office, I knew this case was different. She laid out the facts with the precision of a surgeon. But her husband's betrayal was a raw wound. I told her to trust the process, not her heart. That was the best legal advice I could give her. 3 months later, we were filing the paperwork. It was my client, and her voice was pure steel. She explained their entire calculated financial scheme to me. The case unfolded exactly as I'd predicted. That 2-hour drive replayed in my head constantly. Every piece of evidence was a monument to his greed. I should have prepared her more. Why didn't I? But seeing her resolve, my professional doubt vanished. She was under pressure, but her strength was absolute. A profound sense of professional respect hit me hard. This was my client owning the room. She wasn't building emotional walls for protection. She was establishing a clear legal boundary. It was the line between her assets and their entitlement. His idea of a partnership came with a ledger. Then came their predictable, desperate theater. We watched Brian's pathetic attempt from her window. The sister was the next predictable phone call. Jessica terminated the call and blocked her number. I just nodded. The move was strategically sound. They arrived with the sunrise, a tactical error. His mother, the sister, and the child they used as a pawn. Jessica made them wait, controlling the encounter. When she opened the door, her demeanor was glacial. Their voices were shrill, laced with frantic demands. She let them in. I stayed back, observing their play. Sharon's earlier questions about property now clicked. Sharon immediately attacked my client's character. Jessica countered with cold, documented facts. It was a bulwark of evidence they couldn't breach. Sharon's language then escalated to pure malice. She presented her version of a settlement. Jessica asked a single question: for how long? That simple query completely dismantled their position. My client had kept every single financial record. She methodically deconstructed their entire argument. Using the kid as leverage was a low blow. He ran in screaming it was his home, and she had to tell a child his family was manipulating him. That boy believed he'd found a new home. Instead, his grandmother weaponized him, aiming him directly at Jessica's composure, a sickening legal tactic. When the boy cried, his aunt just pulled him aside. Then Sharon declared they were moving in, a demand. I felt my professional calm fracture. The threats followed, implied legal trouble. The promise Brian would abandon her. Classic coercion. And I thought, I should have foreseen this ambush. For them, marriage was a transaction. A wife provides, the in-laws collect. This was her last chance to capitulate before we filed. So Jessica simply opened the door for them, ordered Sharon out of her house. She used the word divorce like a shield. I knew my client was ready to fight. The sister's final threat, "You'll regret this." Jessica's retort was perfect. "I only regret your family." Sharon sat on the couch, refusing to budge. That's when my client pulled out her phone, 911 pre-dialed, documenting trespassing in her own home, a lawyer's necessary grim advice. "I'm counting to 3, she said, her voice like ice. They finally scrambled out, hurling insults at a woman for defending what was hers. That 2-hour conference call was the most intense of my career. Every minute was filled with the potential pitfalls I had warned her about. Brian called her while I was reviewing discovery. He sounded baffled. He'd only heard his mother's distorted, self-serving narrative. But against Jessica's evidence, his story crumbled. You could almost hear the gears turning as help began to sound like extortion. Her in-laws spoke of family like an obligation, a debt. Jessica came to my office and simply showed me the ledger of their transactions. I watched the realization dawn on him during discovery. His mother's arguments, once gospel, now sounded like cheap manipulations. The fog was finally lifting. She asked me once, prepping for the deposition, "Did he ever see me as family?" It wasn't about hurt feelings. It was about asset valuation. She wasn't the one who commodified their marriage. She just held up the invoice his family had been running up against her name since day one. Even a gold bracelet he'd given her was logged in his mother's records. A gift from a husband converted into a line item on my client's balance sheet. She had to ask him, "What am I to you?" The question itself was the verdict, delivered after his mother attempted a hostile takeover of her home. When I finally deposed Brian, he was a ghost. He knew it was over. Jessica filed the papers, but his mother handed her the pen. His mother forced a choice, the family he was born into or the one he built. By drawing that line, she ensured he'd have to cross it. Sharon Collins claimed in her affidavit that Jessica laughed. I know my client. That wasn't a laugh of triumph. It was the sound of utter disbelief. His mother gave him a 24-hour ultimatum. Jessica just gave him a choice: be a husband or remain a son. It wasn't an amputation, it was an offer of the scissors. The call stopped. In her quiet house, I saw the strategy crystallize. Sharon's power play didn't conquer territory. It gave Jessica the resolve to burn the whole map. I listened to a voicemail she played for me. Her description of her mother-in-law wasn't cruel. It was a precise profile of a narcissist. She used the word ambush, and legally it fit. Their love was a debt she could never pay off, a classic case of financial abuse. Her friends provided witness statements confirming this was not normal. Hearing that validation from a third party strengthened her resolve and our case. We advised changing the locks and packing his things. It wasn't spite. It was the necessary somber work of securing her primary asset. That's when I got the call. When a marriage is treated like a corporate merger gone wrong, you don't need a counselor. You need counsel. She called me after the locksmith left, her voice steady. "Mark, it's done." The first tactical victory in a long campaign. I was proud of her. Her parents arrived not as agitators, but as support. Her father's presence was a quiet counterweight to the chaos I knew was coming. Then his father, George, showed up on her porch. It wasn't a negotiation. It was an enforcement action, a clumsy attempt at intimidation. He kept saying, "We're a family." The legal translation was, "You possess assets we desire, and we are asserting a non-existent claim." He left claiming he was treated like a trespasser. I was there. I never said a word. Sometimes, quiet observation is the most powerful position. He accused her of calling his son a freeloader. She never did. She just asked if a marriage could survive being a sole proprietorship. They never got it. My client was raised to be a partner, not a host organism. They saw her boundaries as aggression. She told me what she said to him: "You didn't marry me, you married my townhouse." The moment a case turns from salvageable to a controlled demolition. Every gift from Sharon Collins was a strategic investment. We documented it all. She wasn't a mother-in-law, she was a predatory lender calling in her markers. The moment they mentioned lawyers was the moment I knew we'd win. It moved the fight from their arena of emotional manipulation to mine, the facts. Brian showed up for mediation with his father, who was holding a fruit basket, as if a few pieces of fruit could settle this level of damages. It wasn't an ambush, it was a scheduled meeting. Jessica's mother just asked, "George, what is this really about?" His silence was an admission. They can call her father passive. I call it trusting his counsel and his daughter. He was there to bear witness, not to testify for her. Jessica started calling him Mr. Collins. It wasn't personal, it was a formal notification that his standing in her life had been revoked. Her mother asked Brian if he thought it was a fair partnership. They heard an attack. I heard a question that would be very effective in court. Jessica asked if it was always about the money. Her voice was pure ice. She was cross-examining the last few years of her own life. George lectured about a son's duty. I watched Brian's face. He was finally calculating what that duty was about to cost him in the settlement. To them, my client was an acquisition. Their concept of family was just a hostile takeover disguised by a marriage certificate. I watched her finally confront him directly. George's shock wasn't hurt. It was the impotent rage of a predator that's been trapped. Their anger was rooted in entitlement. They were furious that she'd discovered their plan before they could fully execute it. Then came the pathetic amateur theater, George clutching his chest, a transparent play for sympathy that I made sure the mediator noted. She kept asking why her house was the only option. The answer was simple. It was the path of least resistance to her assets. Pure greed. I was immensely proud as she calmly listed every wire transfer, every loan. It wasn't a complaint. It was a forensic audit of their scheme. I looked George Collins in the eye and said one thing: it's over. He heard a threat. It was simply a legal statement of fact. Her father asked him if he would have married her if she were broke. His silence was the only answer needed. Case closed. I watched Brian try to negotiate to save the deal, but Jessica stood there, composed and unmoved. She wasn't a party to this anymore. She was an observer. When I asked if he married her for love, he talked about stability. In divorce court, stability is just a synonym for money. She told him exactly what he was, a coward and an opportunist. It wasn't an insult. It was a character assessment he couldn't rebut. "You love what I provide." That one sentence disarmed him completely. Against a truth that clean, there is no defense. She told him to leave her property, and his shock told me everything. He was a man who had never heard the word no. On his way out, he called her damaged goods. It wasn't grief. It was the fury of a parasite being denied its host. Jessica didn't even flinch. She just stated that he was the one who was truly broken. It was a diagnosis, not an insult. She recounted how her father always felt judged by his mother's stare. The pattern of manipulation had been there from the very beginning. Their greed was now being drafted into legal motions. What they called a future was, from my perspective, a premeditated shakedown. They twisted her generosity into an obligation. Every time she helped, they logged it as an investment they were owed. His mother cried about a bracelet. She never saw a gift, only an asset to be liquidated. It was just another line item for us. I'll never forget the look on George's face when I laid out our terms. The flat, empty stare of a con man whose bluff has been called. Their strategy was a hostile takeover of my client's life. The only casualty was their son's reputation, which was a fiction to begin with. My first call from a frantic Brian confirmed it. She'd thrown him out. Her friend Olivia had clearly shown her the light. They spoke of family, but their actions described dependency. It wasn't a relationship. It was an anchor designed to sink her. Her success was an indictment of his failure. The entitlement his parents bred in him was the only real poison in that marriage. They called it a setup. I called it a long overdue awakening. She wasn't supporting family, she was funding a lifestyle. For Jessica, it was about dignity, a foreign concept to them. The facts were on her side, which meant the law was too. He claimed she was laughing at him. She was laughing at the audacity of his failing grift. There's a difference. I anticipated his delay tactics. He wasn't a husband trying to reconcile. He was a bad gambler refusing to leave the table. A swift conclusion was necessary. My demand letter was the first step in a clean surgical extraction. Her friend Olivia gave her smart advice. Serve him at work. It's not about drama, it's about ensuring an undeniable legal record. She remained in the house as he packed. It was her asset, a clear statement that their shared home had been an illusion. This wasn't a breakup, it was a lawful eviction. He could keep the keys to the car. She was taking back the keys to her life. He begged for one last talk, another chance to manipulate her. I was relieved she recognized his tired playbook. She had a support system. All he had was the family who taught him that love was a transaction. His texts were a textbook case of love bombing. My advice was simple. Save them as evidence, then block him. His I love you really meant I love your portfolio. They didn't want a partnership. They wanted a transfer of assets. He appeared with roses, a pathetic piece of theater. It was a final, desperate performance for an audience of one. She denied him entry. He belonged on the curb outside the legal and physical boundaries she was now enforcing. She looked at the flowers and said no. That one word was her fortress. His romantic prop had no power there. When he grabbed for her, she recoiled. He'd lost that privilege. Blaming his mother was a coward's final move. Is that all? She asked him, her tone clinical. She was done with his script, done with his appeal for sympathy. He tried to force his way in for a final scene. Her words, "It's not your home," were a legal and emotional deadbolt. She had already changed the locks. When he asked if she'd ever loved him, her laugh was the sound of a case being closed. He called her newfound strength bullying. He saw her self-preservation as an attack. He was still utterly clueless. "Do you think I'm an idiot?" she asked. I knew she wasn't. Her organized receipts were about to become his biggest problem. The Collins family treated her like a corporate sponsor. Her funds paid for everything. She wasn't family. She was an enterprise. When she finally said, "I'm done," their outrage was telling. They didn't see a person leaving. They saw a bank closing. That's when she called my office. After all she'd given, their claim that she was the one abandoning the marriage was absurd. I heard he cried on the phone, not from a broken heart, but from the terror of his credit line being cut. Then came the threats to her career, the desperate move of a man with no leverage left. It was ugly, and it was useful. When he threatened her job, she called me, her voice shaking. We documented everything. This was no longer a divorce. It was a war. His mother and sister arriving for a chat was a calculated intimidation tactic, an attempt to bypass me entirely. They weren't there to mediate. They were there to bully. They called it emotional. I called it attempted coercion. Sharon Collins claimed Jessica felt superior. The truth was, my client operated on a moral code they couldn't begin to comprehend. She locked the door while they pounded on it, with me on the phone advising her. They weren't knocking. They were laying siege. His sister later claimed she knocked politely. Jessica's recording of the splintering wood told a very different story. The building manager calling the cops was the best thing that could have happened. It created an official report of their harassment. She flatly called them thieves. I couldn't argue. The title of mother-in-law was just a technicality. They earned every bit of that shame. Jessica didn't. The mother's final word was a clear threat. He hid behind his own mother like a shield. $50,000. It was a straight-up shakedown. His threats of constant harassment were textbook. She called him shameless. My inaction had a price. He just parroted his mother's toxic rhetoric. They never saw the recorded phone call coming. Their sense of entitlement to her money was nauseating. This wasn't family. It was straight extortion. That restraining order had one message: stay back. For them, every talk was a hostile negotiation. "Let's get you out," I told her. It was a lifeline. That house had become more of a leash than a home. My team's directive was simple: protect her at all costs. I made the necessary calls. They were a credible threat. The protective order bought me some peace of mind. I oversaw the sale. It was about her freedom. Selling that place took the target off her back. For Jessica, that beautiful house was just a cage. Their comfort didn't matter. We focused on her life. We scorched the earth, I advised, a true survivor. Liquidating that asset was her strategic victory. I was proud she refused to let them break her. I saw my wife Sarah hold our daughter. He was a child. This wasn't about war. It was about her future. Her voice never wavered on the call. Pure control. My advice, sever every tie. Leave them nothing. He had no idea what his wife was really made of. The $1.5 million was just noise. I saw the greed in his mother's eyes and kept quiet. Her tone was brittle, but she was building a fortress. Her decisions were surgical, not erratic. I was impressed. He actually demanded her car for his safety. She sold it for $20,000, another brilliant move. Watching the toll it took was hard, but damn, I was proud. They operated on greed, completely void of decency. They called it cruelty. I called it a winning strategy. That recording proved it. I had a genuine fighter. He kept saying, "our house." Legally, it wasn't. They targeted his condo. My oversight failed her there. That 2-hour drive was my professional failure on repeat. Their only principal was attached to a dollar sign. In our first meeting, she told me they'd branded her a monster. It's a classic ugly tactic. I just made a note. The story that she was broke was amateur hour. It was a transparent play to paint her as a gold digger while they hid assets. His name kept lighting up her phone on my desk. I watched her silence it, her expression like stone. Each call was just a key rattling a lock. He'd offered to disown his family for her, a grand empty gesture to a woman who just wanted him gone. It was worthless. "If I had millions, you'd be begging," she'd told him. She repeated that to me, and the entire case clicked into place. It was always the money. That evening, I called my investigator. "Put a tail on them," I said. My tone was flat. We were done playing defense. The rumors were straight from the playbook. A failed business, financial ruin, anything to make them look like the victims. It was cowardly. To hear they called her their piggy bank was disgusting. A confession, really. They were projecting their own parasitic greed. His mother called with a fake offer of support, a clumsy attempt to see if their smear campaign was working. I told her to block the number. They were worried about their reputation. I had to laugh. "Who looks worse?" I asked my paralegal. "The one who gets away or the ones who built the cage?" They thought this was a squabble over some cash. They never understood Jessica was fighting for her life, for her very name. Using sob stories to isolate her was a nasty, predictable move. Paint her as the villain. It's an old trick that never holds up in court. "I heard about your little problem," one of them said in a voicemail she played for me. They still saw her as a child to be controlled. And Jessica just laughed when she told me, a real laugh. That's when I knew they had already lost. She was never going to be their prey. Then came the text demanding $5,000, a fee for the trouble of trying to ruin her. The nerve was almost admirable. When she refused, the price became $10,000 for his humiliation. I could see his mother's fingerprints all over that move. It was extortion. They called $10,000 the price of freedom. I called it Exhibit A in our filing for a restraining order. Threatening to involve her parents was their last pathetic card. They had no idea that family was her fortress. They held nothing. They brought up their lawyers, hoping the threat would make her fold. It did the opposite. It meant the fight was now on my home field. But going after his premarital condo was their fatal mistake. A desperate, legally idiotic move. The discussion was officially over. We filed. Their use of the term community asset was just poison. They would ruin their own son to get a shot at her. Truly toxic. Through every deposition, her spine was absolute steel. They had taken a good woman and forged her into a warrior. They had no idea. He was a no-show for the hearing, naturally. It didn't matter. I stood right beside her. Let them come. We were prepared. We had offered a private settlement meeting. He'd refused, wanting the drama of a public courtroom, a spectacle he was never going to get. We were on the courthouse steps when Brian and his father finally showed. They stopped cold when they saw me standing with her. I just held their gaze. They looked from my face to hers, and the fight just bled out of them. It was over. I put my arm on her shoulder, and we left them standing there. My phone rang late that night. Jessica's voice tight with adrenaline. They'd pushed past security. Brian was yelling it was a family issue. I was in my car before we hung up, a 2-hour drive on pure, cold anger. When I arrived, he was literally using his mother as a shield. Under the fluorescent lights of the police station, I saw the guarded tension in her face finally dissolve. She'd held it together. I had it from here. His father was talking about a quiet deal. You don't kick in a door for a quiet deal. Their aggression gave her the moral high ground. I heard him call her heartless. I looked at my client, standing tall, and knew he was a fool. She wasn't losing anything. She was winning her life back. His dad kept calling it a family discussion. Breaking and entering isn't a discussion. They underestimated her. It was their first and final mistake. She swore to me she wouldn't break, and my presence was the guarantee. I looked at that family and knew they'd never truly seen her at all. Brian reached for her, still pleading. She flinched as if from a hot iron. He never stood up for her, and that's when she erased him. Is assaulting someone a little argument now? Her voice cut right through his pathetic whining. I stood behind her, a silent wall. I walked right past Brian and his family as if they were furniture. Let them feel invisible for once. The guard was already giving a clear statement. "My name is Jessica Miller," she said, her voice solid rock. She met his mother's eyes. Former mother-in-law. That single word ended their fantasy. "I will not mediate," she stated to the officer. They looked shocked. They actually thought they still had a say in her life. This was the end. The mother, Sharon, started crying. I remembered her questions about property values. Those weren't tears of grief. They were tears of a bad investment. She told the officer the simple facts. They came to her home. They became aggressive. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was trespassing. The lobby security cameras caught everything. Best legal advice I ever gave her. That footage was the key that locked the door on this chapter for good. When the officer mentioned holding cells, the sister looked terrified. A child caught in a storm. But it wasn't Jessica's job to save her anymore. Jessica just looked at all of them, her face unreadable. "I warned you." I knew she had. They just never believed she had the strength to follow through. He called her cruel, and I felt a protective anger rise in my chest. This wasn't cruelty. This was self-preservation, plain and simple. He punched a wall, a pathetic show of force. 5 to 10 days, the cop said, sounding bored. The number didn't matter. The war was already won. He went to his knees for his parents, not her. At that moment, I knew he could never be her equal. He pressed his face to the precinct floor. She just asked, with ice in her voice, if this was his choice. Then she pulled out the signed separation agreement. My respect for her solidified. My concern vanished. He signed away his claims to save his family. The order wasn't for punishment, it was for her protection. The fine was about establishing a record of behavior, a lesson in accountability they would never learn. They left with a citation and a $200 fee. I was there to counsel my client, nothing more. She spoke to him as if he were a stranger. "My office, tomorrow at 9 a.m. The finality was absolute. "Don't be late," she commanded. He tried a pathetic ploy about a debt. Her resolve was a fortress. The debt was fiction. "My problem now," she said. "You're not." I saw the man-child he was and the woman she was becoming. "After tomorrow, we are strangers." The line was drawn. As we left, I knew she was finally free. I'm sure his family has a narrative for us. They project theft because they tried to steal her future. He appeared at my office and signed everything. I was told he offered an apology. Words are wind. He claimed he loved her. What he loved was the idea of her, not the resilient person she actually was. "You broke that word," she replied, her voice flat. When he was gone, the real Jessica Miller returned. She met her friends that evening, not for a celebration, but for a quiet moment to finally exhale. She returned to her childhood home. They'd claim it was about money. It was about finding sanctuary. He tried calling. She powered her phone off. His family's manufactured crises were no longer hers. On Monday, she returned to her career. They were a footnote in the story of her life, not a chapter. I knew this divorce was inevitable when she sold the car. He saw it as a gift. She saw it as a leash. His family found her lacking. The truth is, they never possessed the class to appreciate her value. She drove to work, leaving that entire chapter behind. I felt a profound sense of relief for her. I pictured her at her desk, surrounded by people who valued her competence, not her compliance. Her career wasn't an escape. It was her identity, the one thing they couldn't touch or control. Let them manufacture their own shame. I feel none. Our victory was securing a daughter's right to herself. That office was her sovereign ground. When her home became a battlefield, she retreated to her strength. Their gossip is irrelevant static. We didn't take anything. We simply took our client back. I heard his mother, Sharon, found the situation amusing. Their concept of loyalty was purely transactional. The townhouse was never for her. From the start, I saw it as a strategic asset for his family's portfolio. My paralegal flagged further issues. Good. Brian was nothing more than an instrument of their greed. I can picture Sharon already scouting for his next provider. A woman's independence is a foreign concept. Move on quickly is their playbook. They treated her like a depreciating asset, not a human being. The life they promised was a gilded cage. This case wasn't a separation, it was an extraction. The core of the case was simple. She was better than them in every way, and they couldn't tolerate it. I saw his social media post, a single stake. It was the most transparent bid for sympathy I'd ever witnessed. Table for one. A calculated move to frame her as cruel. This wasn't grace, it was public relations. The night I met his mother, she asked about my assets. It wasn't conversation, it was evaluation. The lie about his business was the tipping point. They wanted her inheritance. Her refusal made her the enemy. Her mother, Sarah, urged her to call me. Her friends agreed. They all recognized the predatory behavior. Sarah celebrated with a cake that read, "Happy Freedom Day." In my profession, you rarely see such pure relief. That marriage was a prison sentence. We were just glad she finally broke parole and came home. While he retreated to his childhood bedroom, Jessica slept peacefully in hers. The contrast was everything. She's a Miller, and that name means family. Theirs is a brand. She was never a piece of their property. Their clan called her friend's photo an attack. Her displaying happiness was an affront to their narrative. The online comments were brutal but accurate. Con artists and a mama's boy. They revealed their own dysfunction. I could almost hear Sharon dictating his texts. One last desperate attempt to rebrand their avarice as love. That text was a playbook, pure leverage. Her two-word reply was a perfect dismissal. I drove her to the mediation. I was the wall. His last power play failed. He left with nothing. I remained detached. It was what she required. His threat was just noise. We let it fade. He was removed. She signed for her own future. It was her separate property, an open and shut case. I heard her dark joke, a survivor's toast. The mother's smear campaign began as expected. His public rebound was a transparent PR move. Drive meant money. She just spoke the truth. After the call, her voice was finally lighter. She'd dropped 200 pounds of dead weight. Our discovery shredded his self-made narrative. $1.35 million, the cost of peace. She went out to feel normal, not to replace him. Burying trash. The case file was finally closed. Build with was code for fund my next failure. Her calm wasn't coldness. It was our advantage. We toasted her future, not his financial ruin. I was finally meeting the real Jessica Miller. My focus was my client, not their opinions. Attacking her sister was a desperate failed tactic. Opposing counsel mentioned karma. I saw checkmate. A solid prenup and a client with a steel spine. Then Brian and his father appeared for the deposition. She called his 3-month marriage an act of cowardice. Part of my job was to neutralize her friend's advice. She initially tried to be charitable. I advised against it. The moment she felt nothing, I knew our fight was won. She traded idealism for unbreakable strength. She moved home. It was a strategic retreat. She arrived after a hard night, but more resolved. From the start, I framed this as a hostile takeover. Their easing her burden was asset stripping. They underestimated her, a fatal mistake in litigation. His mother in the master bedroom showed their intent. She told me his embrace felt like a prison. What they called coldness, I recognized as clarity. When she called them con artists, the real work began. Their idea of reasonable was her total surrender. She told them to leave. That's where I came in. His last message was a threat, not a plea. His rage wasn't a broken heart. It was a broken deal. Model. Then we got the motion citing his mother's failing health. In my world, that's just a delay tactic dressed up as a medical crisis. Their whole financial life was built on Jessica's portfolio. The moment she cut off access, the entire shaky structure came down. In the deposition, they mourned a lifestyle they felt was stolen. I had to remind them it was never theirs to begin with. I got a call from her husband's new lawyer. Good. He's going to need someone to explain how you can't claim a house you never paid for. I saw their entire playbook in the first filing, the same entitled greed I see every week. Their only error was underestimating Jessica. That panic they must be feeling now? I felt a version of it for 2 hours driving to the emergency hearing, knowing I had to protect her. They never saw her as a partner, just an asset. When the asset pushed back, their only move was to try and break it. This was never just about money. It was about appropriation. They wanted her stability. But my client refused to be their foundation. I'm sure the weight of their bad decisions is heavy, but my pride in her performance, that's unshakable. It's everything. She didn't lose her son to my client. She lost him the moment she decided Jessica was just a balance sheet to be liquidated. This isn't what I'd call a victory. It's just my client standing in her own house on her own 2 feet, finally able to breathe. Sharon Miller tried to build a fortress and was left with rubble. I just wanted a fair settlement. I'll settle for watching Jessica be this strong. Every selfish demand they made probably felt like a smart move to them, and every single one landed like another knife in my client's back. When the verdict came in, I looked at the wreckage. But they were the ones buried under it, not her. She was the one left standing. It must be a brutal thing to suddenly realize you're the villain of the story. It's a hell of a thing to watch your client prove it. All they have now is a quiet room and the bill for what they did. My client has quiet too. She earned hers. It's called peace.